From the Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to St. Matthew, who proclaimed life to the world, let us listen to the proclamation of life and salvation for our souls.
Remain silent, O listeners, for the Holy Gospel is about to be proclaimed to you. Listen and give glory and thanks to the word of the living God.
As Jesus came out of the temple and was going away, his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Then he asked them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I tell you, not one stone will be left here upon another, all will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered them, "Beware that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nations will rise against nations and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginnings of the birth pangs. Then they will hand you over to be tortured and will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Baruch Mo Abun.
This is the truth. Peace be with you.
Praise and blessings to Jesus Christ, our Lord and God, for giving us his words of life. Praise and blessings to Jesus Christ, our Lord and God.
Father Charbel, members of the Hawash and Raful family, brothers and sisters watching on live stream. Did you know that God made us from stardust? God made our bodies and everything in creation from elements such as iron, carbon, calcium, and oxygen. And these things were formed inside the bellies of stars through great heat and pressure. They're the building blocks of all life on Earth. And one day, a long time ago, many millions of years ago, a star exploded. And when it exploded, it lets out all the elements. And then God used those elements to make our bodies and to make all life in creation. A famous astronomer and scientist by the name of Carl Sagan wrote, "The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made on the inside of a dying star. We are made of star stuff." Now, why am I talking about all this? Because that star died, we live, we have life. And this is the great mystery, that God brings life out of death. We see this mystery in all of nature. Every year, winter covers the earth, the plants die, and then in spring, they rise again. Every month, we go from a full moon to an empty moon. Every day, the sun dies and rises again in the morning. And Jesus says, the seed must fall to the ground and die if it wants to bear fruit. This is the great mystery in nature, the mystery that God brings life out of death. And we see this mystery not only in nature, we see it in our individual lives, and we see it in all of history. And this is the great mystery that we celebrate in this season of the glorious cross. And it's the mystery that Jesus was speaking about in tonight's gospel. The disciples asked Jesus, "When's the end of the world? When's everything going to die, Jesus?" And Jesus doesn't give them an answer. He doesn't give them a date because he doesn't know. In Matthew's gospel, he says the angels don't know, the Son doesn't know. Only the Father knows when the end will come. But Jesus does say that there will be wars and rumours of wars and earthquakes and famines. And he probably could have added, and pandemics too. And he says these things must happen. They're the birth pangs. He calls them birth pangs. And why must they happen? Because this is just the great mystery of nature. Because in a sense, the world is always ending on a certain level. It's always dying on a certain level. It's always changing. And for something to change, the old must die in order for the new to be born. And he calls the terrible things in history, such as wars and earthquakes, he calls them birth pangs. In other words, this is the suffering and pain that we must go through if we want the future to be born. And at this moment, we're going through this pandemic, and it feels like everything is changing. It feels like everything is dying. It feels like the end of the world. And I think what Jesus is trying to teach us is, don't worry. These things must happen. But God will bring good from it. God will bring good from this pandemic. Just like he brought good from the cross. The worst thing to happen in history was the crucifixion. But from that, the best thing in history happened, the resurrection. And that's what God does. He brings good out of evil. He brings light out of darkness, and he brings life out of death. The cross is the price we must pay for the future to be born. The cross is the price we must pay for new life to happen. And the amazing thing about our religion is that we believe that God shares in that price. God shares in our suffering. God shares in the birth pangs of history. Just like a woman when she gives birth, blood and water flow from her body for her child to be born, so Jesus, on the birthing bed of the cross, blood and water flowed from his body as he gave birth to his child, the church. God in Jesus shares in the birth pangs of history. We don't only believe in a God who suffered for us, we believe in a God who suffers in us, through us, and with us. That's why in a church you will always see an image of Jesus on the cross. If you go into a Jewish synagogue, you will never see an image of a dead Moses. If you go into a mosque, you will never see an image of dead Muhammad. You won't find a statue of the dead Buddha in a Buddhist temple. But if you go into a church, you will always find a naked man, a dead man, killed and rejected by his own people. Because for Christians, the cross is the path to life. The cross is the path to life. And that's why we call it the season of the glorious cross. We don't call it the season of the terrible cross. And that's why on the day Jesus died, we call it Great Friday or Good Friday. We don't call it Terrible Friday, because on that day, Jesus or God saved the world. But if we're honest, if I'm honest, I don't like the cross. I don't want the cross. Say I love Jesus, but in the boxing ring of life, when the cross comes, I never want it. Nobody wants the cross. That's why at his crucifixion, Jesus was alone, except for a few women and his mother, and one disciple, the beloved disciple. And today is also the feast of St. John the Beloved. And it's only in his gospel that we learn about the beloved disciple. If you read the gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's only women at the cross. But in John's gospel, there's one disciple, the beloved disciple. And John never names him. We don't know who he is. He just calls him the disciple Jesus loved. And maybe the reason he doesn't name him because he wants us to put our name there. He wants us to be the beloved disciple, because it's only love that will keep you at the foot of the cross. It's only love for Jesus that will give you the courage and the strength to stand with him as he hangs nailed to the cross. And at this point in history, Christ is suffering in his church. And if you are watching at home, on live stream, you are the beloved disciple because you are staying with Christ, who is suffering in his church because they want to eat the bread of life, because they're hungry but they can't because the doors are closed and Christ is suffering, but you are staying with him. You are showing your love. You are proving your love. As Catholics, we believe in the end of the world. We believe at the second coming of Christ that the world will end. But we also believe in the resurrection of the body. And we believe that the universe will share in that resurrection. The Catechism of the Church teaches that the visible universe is itself destined to be transformed, not destroyed. Transformed. Everything will be transformed. Just like what happened to Jesus' body at his resurrection and ascension, and what happened to Mary's body at her assumption. These are symbols of what are going to happen to our body and the whole universe at the end of time. So don't be afraid of the pandemic. Don't be afraid of the end of the world. Don't be afraid of your own death. Because from suffering, darkness, and death, God always brings joy, light, and life. And as he says in tonight's gospel, don't give up. The one who stands firm to the end will be saved.